But first, some breaking news. We are joined now live from Lima in Peru by Brien Foerster. Brien is an author researching the megalithic structures in the region, along with the elongated skulls of a rare red-haired or auburn-haired race. Brien has also written about the ancient history of Hawaii, the mysterious stone monuments of Peru, and, of course, the lost continent of Mu. Hello, Brien, are you there?
Yes, Mark, how are you?
Oh, very well, actually. It's quite fortuitous that we got in touch with you today because I know you've been featured on previous shows of Windows on the World on a wide variety of subjects, including the megalithic structures of Peru and, of course, this ancient red or auburn-haired race, which seems to tie in with the elongated skulls found there. And you have some breaking news for us today, don't you, Brien?
Well, it's preliminary information, but it does come from a geneticist from the United States who has done a lot of work with the U.S. government. So, of course, he has credentials. And after 2 years, he suddenly emailed me this morning and said that at least one of the samples that was sent to him 2 years ago is revealing very intriguing results in that what happens is that he has taken the DNA information that he was able to extract and then send it via email to GenBank, which is the world warehouse, basically, of genetic knowledge, which covers all species that have so far been genetically decoded. And he's found segments of DNA from the Paracas area of Peru, from one of the elongated skulls that, as you mentioned, doesn't match anything relating to humanity as we know it, which is quite intriguing.
Well, it is, and it must be great and interesting to you because of all the work you've done in looking into these skulls, because there's many different types of elongated skulls, aren't there?
Well, there are. The thing is, the majority of elongated skulls found around the world, and there are many locations where they've been found, clearly are the result of ceremonial cranial deformation, where a baby skull has been altered to assume a given shape. The question has always been, why would a culture, or why would so many cultures around the world do that? And it has been a theory that they were emulating someone or something from the distant past. And so this initial DNA result seems to indicate that, in fact, we're looking at something which conventional science will have a very difficult time dealing with.
Well, conventional science kind of has a difficult time dealing with a lot of this stuff, doesn't it? Including, of course, the megalithic remains and these skulls.
Well, unfortunately, conventional science has a great deal of difficulty dealing with a lot of things. And so we are also starting to question the whole idea of the Darwinian evolutionary paradigm. It's such a fractured theory, and I think there are too many people who believe that Darwinian evolution is a solid, proven science, which I don't believe it is, and I am, by training, a biologist.
Yeah. What would you say to people who say, well, all these skulls are just clearly cranial deformation, and it's just a part of history, which was, you know, the pharaohs also used to do this, didn't they? But the main thing is the time, isn't it? So what would you say to people who say, well, all this is just cranial deformation, and it's just an ancient rite that took place?
Well, David Hatcher Childress and I published a book 2 years ago on the subject, the global phenomenon of cranial deformation, which occurred on average about 2,000 years ago in many different parts of the world. And the three common denominators amongst all the cultures, when it was asked when possible, some of the cultures have disappeared, but the three basic factors in question, or answers given when the questions are, why was this done, is number one, it was thought to increase intelligence. Number two, it was thought that it was a thing of beauty. And number three, that is what the ancestors looked like. So it's the third point, which is the most intriguing, and which this initial DNA result is indicating that we're looking at something which is not in history or science as we know it.
Yeah, that's always kind of left out, isn't it? That it's something that that was being copied from ancestral heritage. The cradle boarding phenomenon obviously did go into many countries around the world, and it's kind of used against this idea of these elongated skulls, isn't it? As though they all had this cranial deformation. And your research has gone into areas where you think this is not the case, obviously, because you've looked at so many different skulls. And a lot of these skulls have been taken off show all around the world, haven't they? But they're still on show in Peru. Is that right?
Yeah, it's like, unfortunately, that's been a common practice for at least 100 years, that any artifact, whether it's skeletal remains or mechanical artifacts, etc., that don't fit a specific historical paradigm, is taken off of public display. That's definitely the case in countries like Egypt, as well as Peru, and definitely in the United States, where there is substantial evidence that there were races of people who were not Native American, who were very large in stature in the distant past. Not necessarily giants, but people 7, 8, maybe even 9 feet tall. So it's this whitewashing of museum collections and a lot of knowledge through conventional means that really has to be removed at this point, because we're in the 21st century and we all deserve the right to know who our ancestors were and what the real history of humanity is.
That's exactly right. Have you any theories on why you think that there is this agenda to hide this? Is it just that they have to keep the Darwinian theory alive, or is it something deeper?
Well, I think part of it is to keep the Darwinian paradigm alive. It's just a sense of control in general, which I know a lot of your listeners and viewers know about through the work of great people like David Icke, is that we have been systematically lied to for a long time about who we are, where we come from, etc. And it's little things like the result today, which is developing a little crack in the history of humanity, and from this, of course, further testing will be done. You can't base anything on one test of one skull, but systematically we'll be processing more information, more DNA, and see if we can develop some kind of picture of what was going on, at least on the coast of Peru, about 2,000 plus years ago.
Yeah, could you just tell us where this skull was found? Is this a recent find, or is it something that's been in a museum for a while?
It has been around for a while, a few years at least. I think your viewers and listeners, if they Google or look in any of the big websites that has photographs like Bing Images or whatever, and if you put in elongated skull, alien skull, human hybrid skull or whatever, you almost always wind up with photographs of skulls from this one site or area called Paracas in Peru. And that's where this particular skull came from. And that has been more or less a major focus of my life for the past 3 to 4 years, is this area where these strange beings seem to have lived 2,000 plus years ago, and conventional archaeologists and anthropologists have basically paid no attention to this area or culture for more than 60 years.
No, that's right. This is the anomalous thing, really, isn't it? The way it's kind of left out of the historical record, and that's what alerted me to it, because I started looking into the red-haired giants and these people with auburn or red hair that seem to predate the indigenous and Aboriginal American people, and of course the South Americans, but they were found all over the world, and they seem to be a very seafaring or exploratory race of people, because their skeletons were found everywhere. Is there any actual evidence of where they originated from?
No, that's the strange thing. For example, the Paracas culture, which is the one I've been studying, they suddenly appear on the coast of Peru about 3,000 or possibly even more years ago. They have genetically red hair. It's not red hair as in Irish or Scottish. It's more of an auburn with almost like a fire color to it. There are many stories from many different cultures around the world of there being royal bloodlines of people having reddish hair. Of course, that, seemed to have been the case in ancient Europe, in the Middle East, and throughout Polynesia and places like that. And the important thing is that red hair is recessive. It represents only 1 or 2% of the population in general. So to have all of these elongated skulls appearing in an area like Paracas, Peru, having red hair. And the important thing to say is that Paracas is a complete desert area. It gets less than 1 inch of rain per year. So it's a perfect place for the preservation of not only artifacts, but also human remains. We have found literally human skulls with complete, like a complete red hair, almost as though that person would be like 1, 2, or maybe 5 or 10 years old. At least had been dead for that long, but we know for sure that the Paracas culture disappeared 2,000 years ago, and so it's the fact that the red hair shows up over and over and over again that's very, very curious.
It is. Do you think this ties in with the rhesus negative anomaly?
I honestly don't know what that is.
Well, it's just that people with rhesus negative blood, it doesn't seem to match any other blood group on the planet. And it's obviously the rhesus negative has anomalies within it with as far as rhesus negative males and rhesus negative females. When they breed, the first child will live, but the second one will be killed. And the sort of antibodies are created against the child. And this is very, very unusual. And it ties in with what's happening to rhesus negative children. It's a very interesting area, and it would be very interesting to find out what the blood groups of these particular races are, because the red-haired gene is very prevalent with rhesus negative.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry. I know of that as being Rh negative, not.
Sorry,
not,
yeah, of course, yeah.
But actually, and in fact, my mother is Rh negative. But aside from that, the funny thing is, it's great that you mentioned that, because I've in fact contacted researchers who were recently here and have just returned to the United States. They were able to take samples of blood and tissue from some of these ancient Paracas remains, and I've asked them to conduct blood typing if possible, as well as much more analysis of the red hair itself, because it should be quite simple, even for a police forensic department, to be able to distinguish whether the hair is naturally red or whether it's the result of dyeing or bleaching from the sun, etc. It's quite simple that it's very difficult for black hair to in fact oxidize to a lighter color, whereas reddish hair or reddish brown hair can of course bleach. And anyone who has any kind of blonde hair will know that if they go to a tropical location for a week or two, their hair of course will turn light very rapidly. Whereas with people with black hair, it's very difficult. And what is basically known genetically is that the native people of North America, Central America, and South America have a very strong tendency of having jet black hair, brown eyes, and darkish skin. And so what we're starting to see from the Paracas examples, as well as other samples from the Cusco area and into Bolivia, is that there are these anomalous people who seem to have lived there in the distant past, not only with elongated skulls, but with these other genetic aberrations, not Native American in character.
Yeah, and also you discovered that this is also where the people from Easter Island originally had red hair. Is that right?
No, that's definitely true. That, again, is something that was proven by Van Roggeveen, who was the Dutch explorer who named Easter Island and was the first European to arrive there. I believe it was in the 1720s, and what he remarked in his journal was that he saw people of every skin color, as well as people with black hair, red hair, and even blonde hair. And so Easter Island is a very curious place, not only for those factors I've just stated, but of course the presence of the giant Moai statues, etc. I'm a sailor, and so by studying the wind and current systems of the Pacific Ocean, Easter Island would have been a very strategic location for seafaring people because it has abundant fresh water. And so anyone traveling through the South Pacific wanting to go to South America or from South America would want to stop at Easter Island to replenish their supplies. And there could have been fascinating genetic mixing thousands upon thousands of years ago on that little island.
Yes, and the Moai, those very large statues, in case people don't know of them, they're very, very tall, aren't they? They're about 30 to 50 feet tall. Is it about 20 feet under the ground as well? They're these huge kind of pillar-like statues.
Yeah, that's the intriguing thing, which was discovered by Thor Heyerdahl in the 1950s, and which most people don't know, is that when you see a picture of Easter Island and you see the giant heads, every single one of those heads is part of a complete body. So when you see a 10 or 15 foot tall Moai head, there is a complete body under the ground, and there are more than 900 of them on that little island.
It's totally anomalous, isn't it, with anywhere in the world? There's nowhere like Easter Island.
There is nowhere like Easter Island. There's nowhere where you find that style of sculpture. And the other important point is that I've been to Easter Island twice. The last time actually was with geologist Robert Schock. And there are two styles of these Moai humanoid or human figures. One, the more recent ones look Polynesian in appearance, but the older ones do not. They're the ones with the aquiline nose. They're actually much taller. Quite often they're not shown with eyes, and there are representations on some of their having beards, which is not a Polynesian facial characteristic.
Yeah, that's right. And also the indigenous people there were kind of wiped out with disease, really, weren't they?
Oh, yeah. The history of that island is absolutely horrific. And a lot of the history of the island has been erroneously written down. The idea that the Easter Islanders themselves used up all of their resources and then resorted to cannibalism is highly unlikely. It's probably the result of the fact that they were in contact with Europeans, again, starting probably in the 1720s, and that would have, whether on purpose or by accident, there would have been transmission of disease. And then by the time Captain Cook showed up in the 1770s, quite a few of the population had been decimated. And the very sad story of Easter Island is that it went from there being several thousand native people living there to the point where they were down to 111 individuals, I believe, in the 1880s.
Yes, and this reports of cannibalism doesn't really tie in with them as a race. As far as their sort of legends and stories go, does it really?
Well, nobody is going to be so stupid as to cut down the last of the palm trees on the island. I mean, that is what a lot of so-called serious academics are stating about these people. And the other thing is, you do get a lot of arrogance and racism on the part of some Western academics. I, in fact, as I've said, have been to Easter Island twice, so I spoke with many of the elders of the island to ask them their history, and it's completely different from that which has been written down in most academic journals.
Well, a lot of the academics who write about Easter Island have never been there. Is that true, Brien?
Well, I'm not sure if they've never been there or they've never spoken to the islanders themselves, and that's a very common thing in general amongst indigenous cultures, is that you have many Western academics who will come and, study the area, study archaeological sites, but won't actually go and speak to the people themselves to get their story of their history.
Yeah, that's right. So this skull, I've seen a picture of it. I think we have got a picture of it. Hopefully we can show it if we haven't shown it already. But it's quite small, isn't it? The one, this recent one.
Well, that actually is a very recent one, and that we had a forensic dentist look at it about a month ago, and he stated that individual was about 20 months old when it died. So you're looking at a baby.
Right. So that's definitely a baby skull. Yeah.
It is, and it's very disproportionate in shape and size to a conventional 20-month-old child.
It certainly is. I've seen the skull, yeah. And it's got a lot of hair.
It does, and it has strawberry blonde hair.
Yeah. So this particular find comes just after this other, what it looks like a baby skeleton, but we don't know that it's a baby skeleton, do we? This one that's in this glass case, which is also appears to be an elongated skull, which is something that you were talking about recently. Do you think there's any connection?
Well, it's a very complex picture. I don't have any governmental or institutional funding to conduct the work I'm doing, and I do that by choice because I don't want governments or institutions to either take my results or tell me what I'm supposed to do or how I'm supposed to do my research. So I'm independent. But piece by piece, a picture is coming together, and what we're looking at is we're looking at these incredible megalithic structures in Peru and Bolivia, more so than any other countries in South America. Very mysterious, such as parts of Machu Picchu and other major sites, where you have not only huge blocks of very hard stone being put together to create buildings of immense scale. There's no mortar involved in the construction, so these stones fit almost perfectly together. Conventional cultures such as the Inca could not have done this kind of work because the Inca were a Bronze Age culture. But also at every one of these sites you find evidence of there having been people with elongated skulls living there. And I think the skulls that are being found or have been found are the descendants of a very ancient, mysterious race of people that existed in South America prior to a timeline that conventional archaeology or anthropology will accept. I think we're looking at some of these buildings having been constructed prior to the end of the last ice age. So they're a minimum of 12,000 years old. So we're obviously looking at evidence of advanced people, advanced races with technology, probably 6,000 years prior to what conventional history believes is the case.
Yes, and recently you were trying to date the stones of Pumapunku. Could you just describe that site and where it is for people out there if they've never heard of it?
Well, Pumapunku is a very obscure site, which has a cult following now, which is great. Most likely thanks to an episode of Ancient Aliens I was on. But it's a site located now 7 miles south of the southern shore of Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, and there you have obvious examples of lost ancient high technology because you have flat, hard stone surfaces that are as flat or almost laser flat, but not quite laser flat. You have flatness within 2/10,000ths of an inch over a space of at least a foot or more. So you're definitely looking at lost ancient technology. Conventional archaeology believes that the site was built 2,000 years ago by primitive, possibly Bronze Age people, but I've brought so many engineers and stonemasons to that site, and not one of them believes that a Stone Age or Bronze Age culture could have achieved the precision there. It had to have been done by high technology, and we're looking at thousands upon thousands of years ago.
There are people trying to debunk that and say, of course, they could have been done with Stone Age, Bronze Age chisels, and the stones, the andesite blocks there are some of the hardest rocks in the world, really, aren't they? Was it 7 out of 10 on the scale? Yeah,
it's called the Mohs scale.
Yeah.
Which is based on between 1 to 10. 10 is the hardness of diamond. These are this andesite stone, which also was brought more than 70 kilometers from the quarry, is between 6.5 and 7 in hardness, is incredibly flat. And anyone who wishes to try to debunk it by saying it could have been done or it can be done either with bronze or stone tools, my simple question to them is, send me a video of you or somebody trying to replicate that work and I'll believe you. Don't tell me it can be done unless you can show me how it was done.
That's what we need to see, isn't it, Brien? People going out there and trying to replicate these amazing feats of engineering, really. And the anomalous thing is that we don't know what these blocks were really for, do we?
No, we don't. Unfortunately, Pumapunku, which is part of a larger site called Tiwanaku, there's only possibly 5 to 10% of the stone left in place because it has been used as a quarry actually for at least 1,000 years, and especially during the colonial Spanish times up until a few decades ago. They even used dynamite to explode some of the stones in order to use it to build railway bed material from it. So not much is left, but there's a tantalizing amount left, which is why, again, I have brought engineers and stonemasons to look at it, because they are practical people. A stonemason, of course, knows how to work with stone because they've used their own hands to do so, and engineers would know how, in general, stone has to be cut, because that is part, if they're structural engineers, etc., that is part of their educational knowledge. But for debunkers, whether they're archaeologists or not, to say it could have been done with Bronze Age or Stone Age tools, I question what they're referencing in terms of technique, because no one has been able to give me a decent answer as to how you create an almost laser flat stone surface using primitive technology.
Yes, there's also a suggestion that there's some unfinished blocks there that they couldn't get right, and they've just got these big indentations. What would you say about that?
Well, the unfortunate thing, or the thing you have to be forensic in nature when you look at these sites, and what you have to notice is that you're looking at the recycling from one culture to the next, and it's far more obvious actually in Egypt, where you've had culture after culture after culture, from the descendants of the Islamic people who live there in general now, going back through the Coptic Christians and the Jews and the Romans and the Greeks, and then before that the dynastic Egyptians. We've seen a lot of evidence of stoneworking in Egypt, which predates the dynastic times. So that's before the pharaohs ever existed. There seems to have been very sophisticated stonework going on in Egypt, utilizing massive drills, massive saws that had to have been powered by some kind of sophisticated energy. It wasn't done by slaves pulling a bronze saw back and forth across a stone surface, because these are precise stone surfaces, not crude works. And that's where you do find relationships in between, or between, ancient Egypt and ancient Peru and Bolivia. Not necessarily the same people, but the same level of technology being used thousands of years prior to what conventional history tells us.
Do you think that there is a connection between this ancient race, these people with elongated skulls that predated the people who actually copied that practice, with these ancient megaliths?
I think what we're looking at is we're looking at an ancient global civilization, or series of interconnected civilizations that existed more or less at the same time. It's what some people would refer to, and it's a very dangerous word to use, and that is Atlantis. I don't believe Atlantis was a continent that sank into the ocean, but I think Atlantis, or the Atlantean concept, is something referring to a very ancient, sophisticated human or humanoid culture that existed in different parts of the world at the same time, with levels of high technology that we honestly don't have. Their whole mental and psychic approach to everything was different from how we approach technology in the world. And we're getting inklings now through 21st century technology of how these ancient civilizations could have had their technology, and that is through our attempts at what we call free energy. It's not a new concept. It's an ancient concept which is being revived, and was revived earlier on by people like Nikola Tesla, as well as the maker of the Coral Castle in Florida. I don't think they invented what they were working with. I think they rediscovered ancient forms of technology which we are on, hopefully, the cutting edge of working with now.
This is the area that I find most fascinating, the way the dots join up. And there was this ancient civilization with advanced technology and indeed the thing that seems to be hidden from us, which is free energy. I'd like to thank you, Brien. I hope to speak to you very soon. Thanks for being with us on Windows on the World.
Always my pleasure, Mark.
Thanks, Brien. We'll be back in a few minutes.